All right, welcome Bronco Nation to a very exciting video. This is the first ever time on this channel that I am doing a live stream, a live video. So there's a little bit of nerves here. Hopefully this is a good time. I hope that people tune in and they enjoy this process. We are going to be talking about a lot of very, very exciting things today. We're going to be talking about the Pac-12 news. Obviously, that wasn't the original plan for this video, but things started moving faster than people thought they were going to. And now we're going to be talking about that Pac-12 news and its impact on Boise State, the impact on the Pac-12. And obviously, they got to add some more teams, who they might add. We're going to have all that conversation. We're also going to talk about the Oregon game, the impact on Boise State from that game. Obviously, a close loss, but it had a huge impact, I think, on the future of this season. So we'll talk about that, and we'll give some quick thoughts on Boise State's performance in that matchup. And then we'll also talk about Boise State moving forward. So, as Jeremiah Dickey likes to say, hashtag what's next? What's moving forward here post the Oregon game? What are we looking for in, position battles? Obviously, people always talk about that quarterback battle. I don't think anything has been solidified in the performance so far, at least in the minds of the fans. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Jeanty's Heisman push. We'll talk about Boise State's chance to represent that group of five in the playoffs. We'll talk about all of that. It's going to be a fantastic video. And of course, to my, should be your right side here on your screens, but up here with me, you have a very familiar face for the Boise State fan base. Ron Counts, formerly, of course, with the Idaho Statesman, and after his move, he is up with Hero Sports now. You can find him on Twitter at Ron the Scribe. And I definitely recommend that you check out his work. He has always done such a great job reporting on and analyzing the team. That hasn't stopped now that he's moved on to California. So you should definitely check out his article. It's a fantastic article, fantastic piece that breaks down the Pac-12 move for Boise State, and of course, great stuff as always over there with Hero Sports. So thanks so much for coming on, Ron. This is going to be a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm pumped to be on there a day after what was such a historic day for Boise State. I mean, they finally got the call up to the Pac-12. What a day that was. So thanks for having me on. Excited to talk.
This is going to be a great video. Like I said, very new experience. It's live, and because it's live, you can see that we have the option to include comments, and so that is going to be part of this. So thank you, Linda, for commenting. Go Broncos. This is going to be, again, a great experience. It's going to be a true fan combined experience here. We're going to go through each of these sections, but then at the end, we're going to break and have a chance for you to contribute for any questions that you have, any comments that you have on the discussion that we're having throughout this video. We want those. So please put your comments in the chat below. I'll be able to bring them up as we go throughout. I can already see that we have more comments flooding in. This is going to be a great video. But again, give us all those comments and questions. And hey, if you have a comment or a question or a thought that doesn't pertain to what we're talking about right now, throw it up in the chat anyway. It may pertain to what we're talking about later, or at the very end of the video, I'm going to try and go through and we'll answer any questions. So if you've ever had like a burning question that you wanted to ask on the show and you've never got to, this is a great opportunity to do that. So again, thanks so much for coming on, Ron. And let's get right into it right off the bat. First question. And so we're going to be looking at the Pac-12 news. So obviously, for anybody that has been sleeping for the last 48 hours or so, and they just woke up to watch the live stream, thanks for being here. You may be surprised to find out that Boise State is now in the Pac-12. I think that this is a move that caught a lot of people by surprise. If you've watched my channel, you know that I was not predicting this move. Of course, it was a possibility, but it was not what I thought the primary possibility. And yet, Friday evening, right? No, sorry, it is Friday right now. A couple of days ago, very late in the evening, it was around 9:48, 9:40 Mountain Time. The news breaks that the Pac-12 is targeting Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, and San Diego State. And then within 12 hours, Jeremiah Dickey has announced that Boise State is joining the Pac-12. Ron, how did this news catch you? Is this something that you saw coming, or were you, like the rest of us, completely blown away?
The timing definitely caught me off guard. I mean, to see how quickly it came together, you mentioned it. The reports started leaking out Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning at 6 a.m., it's official. I mean, it's just crazy how quickly something like that can come together. Now, I think for a lot of people, when Oregon State and Washington State signed that scheduling agreement with the Mountain West, we all kind of raised an eyebrow. Like, is what's left of the Pac-12 going to try and poach the Mountain West? Are they eventually going to use this as a way to get those teams? We all kind of thought it was possible, and finally it happened. But for anybody to tell you that they knew it was going to happen now, they're a liar. I mean, it's so quick, And just think about, how many moving pieces this took. It took board of directors and university presidents and ADs all coming to an agreement here in, what a historic day it was for Boise State. Boise State fans, yourself included, you guys will say that this should happen 10 years ago. It should have happened 20 years ago. It should have happened while Kellen Moore was here. There's so many times where this move made so much sense, but it never happened, but it's finally here. Is this the same Mountain West as it was 2 years ago? No, it's not. You don't have the USCs and the Oregons and the Washingtons of the world. But this is a strong conference nonetheless. I mean, you got some quality brands. You got some quality regional rivalries that are really going to flourish in this new conference. I love the makeup. I love the competition.
So I made a video reacting to this news. Like I said, you've written an article on it. I highly recommend people go and watch that. I can't put a link right now, but at the end of this video, I'll go in and comment on the video itself with a link. But I made a video reacting to this news, and it took me, like I said, by surprise. And initially, maybe I'm a little bit more of a skeptical person at the beginning, but I had some questions about whether or not this was the right move for Boise State. Obviously, there are financial restraints that come with this. The out $17 million, and then you lose your special designator for TV deals, which right now is getting you additional $1.8 million. And of course, we don't actually have an actual conference yet. We're still going to a 6-team conference that has to add 2 more and hasn't officially done so yet. So I had a lot of questions about whether or not this was the right move for Boise State, and some of those have definitely been qualmed, and I do think that this is moving forward in the right direction. But did you have some of those questions? Do you think that this is the right move for Boise State?
Yeah, I mean, I think any time that you can get into a quote unquote Power 4 or Power 5 conference, it's the right move. I mean, the payouts, the annual payouts are just worlds different from the Group of 5 and the Power 5 right now. You look at, you mentioned Boise State's additional cut. They were still getting around $7 million a year in TV money. Former Pac-12 teams were getting $18 to $20 million a year in TV money. And the AAC right now, the average team is getting around $8 million. So that money really, really matters. NCAA distributions are going to be higher. It's a great move any way it happens. I mean, so in terms of the exit fees, I wouldn't be concerned about that at all. The Pac-12, the Oregon States and Washington States of the world, they control that $255 million, war chest. I mean, they're going to cover these exit fees, no problem. And think about what the Mountain West is getting. Yes, you're losing a ton of brands. This sucks for the Mountain West, no doubt. But they're going to clear about $111 million from this whole deal in exit fees and the poaching penalties that were built into the scheduling agreement there. So because of that, the Pac-12 is going to be on the hook for about $17 million for each team in exit fees and about $11 million for each team in those poaching penalties. So the Mountain West money-wise is making out, like a bandit. Are they losing their money makers though? Absolutely. I mean, to lose a Boise State, a San Diego State, a Fresno State alone is just killer. But then you add Colorado State in that mix. I mean, it's really tough. What does the Mountain West have left? I mean, right now UNLV, which, let me just say, I was shocked to see UNLV was not part of this initial invite. That market right now, the Vegas market is maybe the fastest growing market in the country right now. They got a couple of pro teams there. They're successful in football and basketball. I really thought UNLV made a lot of sense. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but I think UNLV might still be Pac-12 bound here before too long. But I was shocked to see they weren't part of the initial invite.
Well, we will definitely be covering here what teams we think may be included in the future, whether that's the immediate future where they try to get to 8 teams or the distant future for the Pac-12 as they try to build themselves up. We'll definitely get to that. So you are right that you're getting a little bit ahead, but it's a good sneak peek of what's coming next in this video. I do want to mention before I do actually have a question on what you just said, but before we get to that, mentioning UNLV in the Vegas market, I think anybody that has watched my channel should know that I am not a fan of UNLV as a conference edition, at least not for a Power 4 conference. Because like I said, you look at the Vegas market, you look at what UNLV has done in that market, and yeah, they haven't had the most winning seasons throughout that time, but all the numbers are not what you would anticipate for the market size that they are. They definitely don't compete with teams with much smaller markets, like obviously like Boise State, which isn't necessarily a fair comparison, but even teams like Fresno State, I mean, they're not necessarily competing with teams like that who have smaller regional footprints. And so the Vegas market, when you're looking at them, same thing for USF. I don't like USF as a Power 4 expansion either, because I think when you look at the market, you can't just look at the numbers of the people. You have to look at the kind of people that are there. And that means that the people that are living in Vegas They're there. It's a party city. It's an entertainment city. People are coming there to vacation. They're coming there to be entertained. And you have so many things that are blocking out the lights there. It's an NFL city. So when you go to the Vegas market and you look at them, it's so hard for any college team to make a name for themselves in a market that has so much entertainment already going and people that are so entertainment oriented. You look at Tampa. Tampa is a city where it's not built on small town roots. You have people coming in from all over the country, all over the world that are bringing with them their own fan alliances. They're not coming in and looking for a small local team. They're already coming in as fans of, if they're, from Florida, of Miami and of Florida State and of Clemson, or if they're coming from the north, of Michigan and Ohio State, whatever. They're already coming with their own allegiances, and you have an NFL team sitting right there. And so it's not a city that naturally speaks to a startup level team, a group of 5 team that's trying to make their name either in the lower levels of the Power 4 or within the group of 5. And so I've said that for a very long time. I did say if the Pac-12 was to attempt to regroup and come back together, they would have to target teams that have winning success. Winning cultures. That's the hardest thing to build, is a culture of winning success. We're finding how hard that is for Mountain West schools that are bringing in great coaching hires, but that just don't have the culture and having to start fresh. I mean, Jeff Choate, and Bronco Bleymaier, they're doing great things, but it's so hard to start from rock bottom in those teams because they don't have that winning culture. And that's the hardest thing to build. So I said the Pac-12 would have to go after teams with winning cultures. They'll also have to go after teams with dedicated local fan bases, because if you have a dedicated core, that core can magnetically attract more to it. You can fill your stadium. It looks good on TV, and people coming in, they get excited. And so you're able to maximize the TV market that you do have because you have the core that's already attached to it. UNLV, again, doesn't have that. And you also want teams that are marketable as brands. I mean, Fresno State has done a lot of things in the group of 5. They're a well-known team nationally. Obviously, Boise State and everything that they've done with the blue turf, despite their local regional size. And then you also look at San Diego State, and while they haven't necessarily killed it on the football field, their antics in conference realignment and also their basketball success has definitely raised them in the national spotlight. Colorado State, obviously, a surprise, I think, for a lot of people, but they're putting in the funding to make themselves an attractive candidate. And so what I was most impressed by this is that the Pac-12 broke the mold for the first time of any modern conference, broke the mold, what I would call a broken mold, of going after teams with big markets and academics and not actually looking at the teams themselves and what they bring to the table. And so, I do think that UNLV has something to offer as a secondary choice. The fact that the Pac-12 didn't attack them and San Jose State and, New Mexico just because they have large markets or good academics, they actually went after teams that can bring football as a power and also have that dedicated fan base that can be successful in a national TV digital sphere. That excites me for the future of the Pac-12 because it means for the first time ever, they have their head in the right direction.
I get what you're saying with Vegas, with UNLV playing second fiddle in Vegas to all the other attractions, but you got to remember, TV numbers count a lot. Donor base counts a lot when you're talking about conference realignment, and UNLV has increased in both those areas well over the last several years. TV-wise, they averaged 1.46 million viewers in 5 publicly rated games last year. I mean, that was tops in the Mountain West. So you got to take that into account. And that Vegas market is just growing so fast. It's going to be so easy to recruit there. I just think their success is going to build and build and build over these next couple of years. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised. I can't speak to there being some sort of legislation requiring UNLV or Nevada to be in the same conference. I haven't seen any definitive reporting on that either way. But I mean, if there's a choice, I think UNLV is going to be in this Pac-12. I just can't see them being left out, especially with the Pac needing to get to 8 teams. You look at their other options. There's really not another better option in the Mountain West, not even close. And then you look at the options out west, or in the East. I'm just not sure it makes sense travel-wise. You look at the Memphises and the Tulanes and UTSAs of the world. Maybe UTSA makes some sense, but Memphis and Tulane just don't make sense to have one team in the East, 2 teams in the East. I mean, it's just not going to make sense in terms of divisions or travel budgets and things like that. So I think UNLV is there. Is there a second team in the Mountain West? Maybe it's Nevada just to have that rivalry with UNLV. Maybe it's Utah State because of their basketball success. Those have some possibilities, but UNLV right now is heads and shoulders above the rest of what remains in the Mountain West.
So we can move on here to talking about what teams are going to be joining the Pac-12, and you've already broached the subject there. So you do anticipate that they will look Pac-12 primarily will look at geographic partners, teams that not necessarily are the biggest program in the country from the Group of Five, but that are strong, but also regional partners. And so we're talking teams like maybe UTSA or North Texas or something. Would you agree that?
I think so. I mean, you got to look at a lot of the statements that came out from ADs and presidents yesterday, and almost every one of them mentioned regional. Some of them went outright and said, they want to keep the conference for teams in the West. So I just don't think they're going to cross the Mississippi and try and attack that. In the Mountain West, it's going to be UNLV and Air Force. There's got to be your top two choices. If they go beyond that, if Cal, let's be real, if Cal and Stanford can get out of their contract with the ACC, which no one knows if they can, but if they can, they'll be back in the Pac-12. I almost guarantee it. SMU is a possibility there to maybe leave the ACC and join the Pac-12 if it's possible. But if that can't happen, you're really between a rock and a hard place. I mean, if you're not adding UNLV and Air Force, you got to go North Texas, you got to go UTSA. But I just don't think those programs add as much in terms of TV value and donor dollars. I mean, yeah, they're in Texas. They're somewhat close to that Dallas market, I suppose. But I mean, I just think UNLV and Air Force make the most sense right now just to get to 8. Outside of Stanford and Cal, obviously. Those teams, I'm sure, they wouldn't mind coming back. There's been a lot of talk about them not wanting to be associated with the Boise States and the Fresno States of the world. That old kind of, Pac-12 motto, that R1 research designation crap. It's crazy. If those schools get the chance to not have to travel across the country to play, they're going to take it. Plain and simple.
So you would think that not Boise State, that the Pac-12, if those were going to be primary targets, that they would just go after them initially. So why just take 4 off the bat? Do you think that they take 4 to breach the waters, to get to 6, and then see who else is interested, and then knowing that the Mountain West will always be there to come back to grab teams if they want to, and maybe even get them to come over at a reduced rate because they are now desperate? Is that the thought process here, or is it because they do want to try and target some of those American athletic teams first and then come back to the Mountain West? What's your thought process here?
I'm really not sure. I mean, it could have been a symbolic thing. Obviously the 4 teams they took from the Mountain West in terms of dollars, in terms of TV market, in terms of on the field success are the top 4 in the conference. So maybe they wanted to make a point of welcoming these top 4 teams before they add the next tier, if you will. I really don't know. And, maybe it is maybe they are hoping to get UNLV and Air Force at a reduced rate. I mean, we talked about it, the Pac-12 is going to be on the hook for about $111 million to get these teams out of the Mountain West. So maybe they are hoping for some sort of reduced rate. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Like I said, there's been a lot of chatter about possible legislation requiring UNLV and Nevada to play in the same conference. I can't confirm that or deny that. I have no idea. But it was just surprising to me because I just feel like UNLV is growing so quickly. They've had so much success the last couple of years. I'm just really shocked they were. Now, let's talk about those AAC teams. I mean, Memphis, Tulane, USF, they would be the obvious choices if they go beyond the Mountain West. All those programs are tops in the G5 in money coming in every year. They're tops in the G5 in home attendance rankings, good. They're in solid TV markets. Who do they take? Do they take all 3? I don't think so. I would guess Memphis and Tulane would be the top 2 there. And there was some reporting by, I believe it was Dellinger or someone that Memphis, Tulane, UTSA, these programs have already kind of hired third parties to kind of look into the possibility of conference realignment with the Pac-12. So maybe it happens. If it happens, that'll be a great conference. I'd be curious to see how they work it out travel-wise, if they try and do divisions, how that's going to split. I think if they go that route, they're not going to stop at 8 for sure. I think if they go beyond the Mountain West, they're going to go to 10 or even 12 teams again to try and create more of a clear West-East division type of thing, and that's going to make travel easier. So my guess would be they would do that. But again, my initial reaction is UNLV and Air Force sometime in the next year are going to be getting that Pac-12 invite.
It's an interesting discussion.
There's been some reporting that the AAC is courting the Air Force Academy as well.
Yeah. And
that would make sense. Army, Navy are already in the AAC. They can get all the service academies. So maybe that happens and the Pac-12 doesn't get a chance at the Air Force. I don't know. No one really knows.
I think AAC might be doing that partially as well, because I think they do sense that the Sharks are circling. I do tend to agree that I think that regionality is best. Like, I don't think that we should, that not we. I mean, I guess it is Pac-12 we, right? But I mean, I don't think that the Pac-12 necessarily is going to go out and grab like App State, JMU, Troy, Liberty, like any of those teams, even though they've been successful and some of those teams have, a lot of money and a good fan base. I don't think they're trying to build a West and East division right now. I mean, who knows what the future looks like, especially with the group of five being so chaotic and hectic. And if there's an opportunity to make kind of a super best of the rest conference, I mean, that's all so far in the future. Right now, what we're talking about is a minimum of 2 teams to get to 8. And I know that it was being reported on that there had been mentions of trying to get to 9. So I think that 8 to 9 was the stated goal, at least initially here. And again, I don't know how official the 9 was, but that was being reported on. So you look at 2 to 3 teams additionally. For me, I mean, I do get your point with Air Force. I think this is, I know that we said we were going to hold comments till the end of the section, but I think that Linda brings up a good point here. And she says that the Air Force cannot compete in NIL. And so I think that you see with a conference that is trying to build itself into a brand, right? The Pac-12, they are trying to rebuild themselves as this top level of what remains. They've gone after the bigger brands versus necessarily the bigger markets, and they're trying to build themselves up in that light. Air Force can't compete in that new age of NIL, and I think you're going to see the effects. I think you're already starting to see the effects. Air Force always rebuilds so well, right? Well, this team looks like garbage. I know that occasionally you'll have an Air Force team that takes a down year, and I know they lost a lot from last year. I'm not discounting that, but I think you are starting to see the effects. Every year, the NCAA seems to be coming out with a new rule that hurts Air Force's brand of football, whether it's in their blocking scheme or whatever as well. And so I think that you also you have the other fact, and this was a good conversation I was having with Jake Posey from Master Football, is who pays for the buyout? If the Air Force decides that they want to go and they've got to pay $17 million now, it's a government institution. The coaches are government employees, they're GAs. And so, or G6s, or GS series is what I'm trying to say. They're GS series employees. And so who pays for that? That's the government, right? That's the taxpayers. So now we're talking about congressional approval for a buyout to leave the Mountain West to go to a conference that doesn't even have Army and Navy in it. I think your point on moving to the American Athletic Conference for Air Force is a good one. I think that makes sense for them to now have the Commander Chiefs Trophy. They have their 2 rivals there, Air Force, Navy, and Army, and I could see that being justified on the congressional floors. But if we're talking about some kind of approval that has to be funded by the military or the government, it's hard for me to see them being justified to go over to the Pac-12. And so I think that's another wrench in the waters when talking about Air Force. For me personally, if I'm looking at teams that they go after, and again, I could be wrong. I was wrong in the fact that the Pac-12 came back together. But I think that they try to go into that Texas market. I do agree with the regionality piece, but I do think the American Athletic Conference offers some good teams. I think that they would go after UTSA, who has been a program that's on the rise, obviously has that San Antonio market. And then North Texas, when Boise State played North Texas in the bowl game a few years back, it was a huge conversation piece about how much that program was restructuring itself to make itself a top level attractive program for conference realignment. And I think North Texas is probably one of those teams that's already reached out and contacted the Pac-12. I know that they were saying that many teams were running to contact them. And so I think that you reach down to the Texas market there. It makes mostly geographic regional sense. I agree that SMU, California, and Stanford coming back is probably unlikely. I did have a source reach out to me and say that Cal and Stanford were probably coming back. Again, I don't know how accurate that was. It was a trusted source. But at the same time, I think it's probably unlikely. And so if you're looking at teams that remain, North Texas, UTSA, and going out and grabbing Memphis, who has been consistently one of those top brands, and I think matches the type of team that Boise State and Fresno State are, I think that would be a good move. And it would make this conference clearly the top group of 6 conference in the country.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with the Texas teams. I mean, everyone wants to get into Texas, and you mentioned North Texas. I mean, they've got the Dallas TV market right there. That's a huge market, so that could be valuable. So I don't disagree. Going back to Linda's point for a second, I see what you're saying with the Air Force not being able to compete in the NIL era, but the thing is, Air Force has never been able to compete straight up. Why do you think they run a triple option? It's not because of nostalgia. It's because they don't have the same athletes that everybody else does. The Air Force is always going to get athletic, undersized kids. It's the military. It's going to happen. They're going to get those guys. And don't discount those TV numbers when the service academies play each other. I mean, Air Force's top viewed games every year is against Army and Navy, and those games every year are top 5, 6 in the Mountain West, top 10 at worst in the Mountain West as in terms of most viewed games. So there's some value there from the Air Force Academy. I do like UTSA. I do like Texas, North Texas, even, throughout there at Texas State. I mean, these are programs on the rise big time. I just think, like I said, if they're going to do that, I think that's going to be down the road when they're ready to go to 10, maybe even 12 teams. I think right now they're focused on hitting that 8-team minimum, and the most obvious choices are UNLV and Air Force, or if they're forced to do it, UNLV and Nevada. I mean, I know Nevada doesn't totally fit the Pac-12 footprint, but if that's what it takes to get UNLV, I mean, why not do it? You're not getting anything out of San Jose State. I mean, you have teams in California already. There's no, even though it's Silicon Valley, there's no money in San Jose State. There's no TV eyeballs there. You're not getting anything out of Wyoming. That's not a program that's really going to give you enough. So really, I think, Utah State, it's a program that's hit or miss football-wise, but they've been really good basketball-wise for the last 5 or 6 years. Maybe that gets them over the hump. I don't know. But, again, in my opinion, it's whatever it takes to get UNLV in that conference. I think that's just the most obvious choice for number 7. Who's number 8? That's anybody's guess. It could be Air Force. It could be Nevada. It could be Memphis, Tulane, UTSA, any of these programs. But I think UNLV has got to be one of those 2 programs.
I definitely agree. I think that if the Mountain West does come back if the Pac-12, got to get that verbiage switch, man. And you're no longer the Mountain West. If the Pac-12,
you're so used to them being the enemy, you got to think of them as your friends now, Pat. I mean, come on, they're your friends now.
Oh man, conference mates, maybe. I don't know if I'm ever going to go friends, but yeah. So I think that I agree with you. If the Pac-12 does come back to the Mountain West to select teams, I think that UNLV is one of those top choices. Now, if they come with the anchor of Nevada, that's a tough one to swing. But obviously, you got to get to 8. So it will depend. I mean, I know obviously you got other teams out there that could be potentially picked. You mentioned Tulane, USF potentially. I know Rice has been mentioned as a potential expansion team. There are options out there, some of them better than others. But I think that the biggest question overall here, because we've already talked about who the Pac-12 could add, and obviously the goal of maybe going to multi-division in the future. But I think the biggest question for the teams that are getting left behind right now is what happens to us, especially if the Pac-12 comes back and does go after UNLV and an Air Force or Utah State, or hey, maybe they want to make this a top basketball conference and go after New Mexico and then accept Albuquerque market. If they do go and grab 2 more teams, now the Mountain West is down to 6 programs. I've seen a couple of different takes on this. Some people are saying that the conference will just spread for the wins. Other people are saying that they'll rebuild. If Gloria Nevarez obviously has done such a great job already keeping the conference together up to this point, she's been a really good commissioner for them. And so if there's anybody that could keep this conference going, it's her, unless she gets brought over to the Pac-12. But if she stays with Mountain West, they have a chance. Where do you see this ending up for them? Do you see them spreading to the 4 corners, or do you see the conference being able to hold itself together?
Well, first of all, I don't think we're going to answer this until the next domino falls for the Pac-12, because that's going to determine a lot, right? Like you mentioned, if they take a UNLV and an Air Force, then the Mountain West is scrambling. They got to take whoever they can get. But if the Pac-12 goes and raids the top half of the AAC, for example, now maybe you think about merging the AAC and the Mountain West and creating what you see as a still competitive group of 5 conference. So it's going to come down to what the Pac-12 does. Now, I'll say this. Don't discount the possibility of them bringing up some FCS programs. I know there's that $5 million move-up fee now, but, I mean, you look at programs like North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State, Sac State, UC Davis. All these programs are kind of on that verge. Tarleton State, all these programs, Weber State, they're all on the verge of making that jump anyway. So the Mountain West can easily rebuild its ranks. Remember, they're going to get $111 million out of this whole deal. So they can help those teams come. It'll be some growing pains for sure. It won't be the same Mountain West as it was, but those programs are real possibilities. The programs that keep getting thrown out right now are UTEP and New Mexico State. If they want to add some quick programs here, both those programs are in Conference USA, but the exit fees are pretty reasonable there. I've read, so I wouldn't be surprised if they chase those programs down. But again, nothing's going to happen with the Mountain West until the Pac-12 decides what it's doing, because that's good. That the Mountain West future is tied to what the Pac-12's next move is.
I know that you have written extensively on North Dakota State's potential to be a Group of Five program, that even a potential Mountain West expansion team. You went on a whole radio tour of Dakota after doing that. So, do you think that those teams offer more value going down into the FCS ranks, grabbing teams that are truly regional, like the Montanas, or that are truly strong and competent programs like the Dakotas, than going after already existing Group of Five programs within your reach, like the Conference USA teams, like the UTEPs, the New Mexico State? Do you think those FCS programs add more value right now?
I think it's close. Right now, knee-jerk reaction is UTEP and New Mexico State are probably your best options. But it's not a far step down to those FCS programs, especially at North Dakota State. I mean, there is money in that program. They have really totally rebuilt their athletic facilities the last couple of years. There's plenty of money there, plenty of money in the Montana schools. So I see some value there. But, right away, if they got to make a quick move, especially, it's UTEP, it's New Mexico State. Maybe it's some other teams in the bottom half of the American or the bottom half of the Conference USA. But those teams make the most sense short term. Long term, maybe those FCS programs will really pay out. I mean, you mentioned it. You create regional rivalries. You really have what is a strong football conference still. The question is, what do you do with basketball? That's a pretty garbage basketball conference. And when you add those FCS programs, even adding UTEP and New Mexico State doesn't make the basketball conference great. It leaves Utah State as the best program every year there basketball wise. So you got to think about that. And here's the other question: what happens with Hawaii? If Mountain West leans in more into basketball, Hawaii is the only football-only member of the conference right now. Are they left out to dry? Are they going independent? Are they going to try and find a new home? I mean, I've heard them mentioned as a possibility in the Pac-12, which sounds crazy because it's just not a moneymaker. But, it is a destination school. They do have their own TV deal, so it kind of affects some of the financials, burden on the conference. Maybe that happens. But if the Mountain West really leans heavily into basketball, Hawaii is going to have to find a new home because they're just not there basketball-wise.
Final question on this Pac-12 before we get into some of these comments that haven't been brought up already. Thank you, everybody who has commented. Continue to do that, whether it's you're making as a statement or if you have a question, throw all of those in. We're going to get to those here momentarily, and we'll get to those between each section for anybody who joined a little bit late. But the final question here on the Pac-12 specifically and this realignment news. Is there any chance that you see beyond bringing back former members, which I think is maybe a ship that's sailed, but is there any chance here that this team this conference can regain its autonomous status? Obviously, Power 5, Group of 5 are made up terms, but what does matter is the autonomous 5, and the Pac-12 was removed of that status by the NCAA once they dropped to 2 members remaining. They also lost out on the money that goes to the autonomous 5 from the playoffs. They're only getting like 3.6 to 3.8 million, something like that, each from the playoff bucket, the playoff chest. So is there any chance that they can regain what was lost if they add the right teams?
I think so. Yeah. I think as far as I understand it, the only thing they have to do to get back to that status is add 2 more teams, and they're going to be there. I mean, so I think they definitely get back there. I think is this going to be the same Pac-12 that had USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA? It's not. It's just not the same conference. But this can be a really strong conference. You've got strong football schools, you've got strong basketball schools, and those are the money-making sports. So I definitely think it can regain some of that status. The whole autonomy title. I'm not sure the whole process, but like I said, my understanding is all they got to do is have the 18 minimum. So will they get there? I think they'll get there.
Well, I hope you're right on that. Let's get into some of these comments so far. And again, I appreciate everybody that has commented so far. I think we just answered this one, or we gave a shot, and Linda here, she corrected herself later. She meant Power 4, Power 5 status. I will say, personally, I am skeptical because I think that when power is given up, those that be are very uncertain to give it back, even if technically they could. And so I think it will depend on who they add. I mean, if you go out and you make the right additions and they can present the right package, then maybe they get it back. I'm not going to say it's a guaranteed thing. I don't think it's just an automatic process. I think it probably does have to come down to some kind of a vote or approval, and we'll see if they get that. But I think that comment was answered there. So again, Linda, you've thank you so much for contributing. And then Bill L here, he says, and let me throw this up on the channel here. After the addition of the next 2 or more teams, where do you think they'll find all the teams necessary to fill out their non-conference schedule? I think this is an important question here. Obviously, that all of that's now completely gone into the wind as far as the non-conference schedules work. Do you see Boise State losing some of the current teams they have to make room, or do they just basically turn around and schedule the Mountain West? How do you see this working out?
Yeah, it really depends on how many teams they land. I mean, if they go 8 to 10 teams, then it's really not going to be much change at all, schedule wise. Now, if they go up to 12 teams, you're talking about another conference game there, so you'll lose some. So that's why I think that sweet spot for this conference is 8 to 10. You get to no more than 10 teams. Your scheduling philosophy really doesn't change. There might be some minor changes here and there, but you go to 12 or even 14 and you're talking about adding more conference games. So that's the key is how many teams does this conference want?
Bill L had another good question that we're going to throw up here as well. Bill, appreciate you. Very loyal listener from way early in the channel's history. But he has another good question here. Say that Stanford and Cal can get out of the guarantee of rights, which is what Florida State and Clemson are trying to do right now. Say they win those lawsuits, they can get out, and they want to come back, or they have the option to come back. Do they want to? So Bill L says here, do you really think Stanford and Cal would lower themselves based on academic requirements? I know initially that was a big thing that they didn't want to bring in Mountain West teams to save the conference. Then what's changed? Would they come back?
And that's the $1 million question. We really don't know. I mean, the Pac-12 held itself to this pretentious standard for so many years, and that's really a lot of people believe that's why Boise State hasn't been in there in the last 20 years. I mean, it's just they see themselves as so much higher than everyone else academically. Cal, Stanford, certainly a huge part of that. I've always heard that they didn't want to be associated with the Fresno States and San Diego States of the world. So would they? I really don't know. And it's going to come down to those court cases that you just mentioned. I mean, if Florida State and Clemson win those cases, then this becomes a real conversation. But until they do, it's not even a conversation because it would cost so much money to get out of that grant of rights agreement that it's just not going to happen. Those programs aren't money bags to begin with. Stanford makes a lot of its money off its Olympic programs because they're very, very competitive. But Cal, that market, Cal does not bring in a lot of money. They don't bring in a lot of eyeballs. That is not a money maker of a job right there. So they can't afford to have a huge paycheck just to get out of the ACC.
Yeah, I think that is a valid point for why they wouldn't leave now, but I think it's also a valid point for why they may come back if they are able to get out of this guarantee of rights. Because I think initially the idea of maintaining that power status was a good one, and it was one that was attractive. But now they're actually counting the costs, and the athletes are probably expressing some feelings, and maybe the coaches are expressing some feelings about this travel, because almost every single game that they have to go to is on the completely opposite side of the country, unless you count SMU. And so I think that maybe they're having a little bit of buyer's remorse here. Is it a possibility? I think that it's at least a possibility down the road.
Let me say one more thing about this whole thing is I don't think Cal and Stanford necessarily wanted to go to the ACC. I think they saw it as their only option. The Pac-12 was imploding. They can't afford to go independent. The Big 12 and Big 10 didn't want them, so they saw the ACC as their only real option. And they do fit that ACC mold of academics and Olympic sports. But I mean, you're right. If they get the chance to not have to travel across the country, they're going to take it. And the cross country travel isn't really what hurts the football team or the basketball teams, but it's every other team. It's the softball team, the soccer team, the lacrosse, field hockey. These teams that don't make any money to begin with, they're getting further in the hole with all this cross-country travel. So I think you're right. If they get a chance to come back, they will, but they might have to swallow their pride and be next to Fresno State and San Diego State. It's just that simple.
All right, we're going to throw up a couple more comments here and then move on to the next section talking about the results of that Oregon game and how it's impacted Boise State. But before we do, not so much questions, but some good comments here. So Bronco Nation updates. Again, best site for Boise State fans on Facebook. Over 24,000, I think, members right now on that Facebook. So great place to be able to connect with Boise State fans. Make sure you check it out. But he says pair UNLV and North Texas. I think that would be a good option, especially with the money that North Texas is putting in.
Two really solid markets, Vegas and Dallas. Those are solid markets.
Solid markets, and especially, I mean, UNLV, again, like I said, I have my own thoughts on them, but North Texas, I mean, they have a passionate fan base, and they do have the want, the desire. I don't think they've necessarily had the means, maybe the financial means for sure, but in the previous eras of college football where you couldn't just buy players onto your roster. I don't think they had the recruiting chops to keep up with the rest of Texas. But hey, it's a wild west out there, quite literally, in Texas and the rest of the country. So they have the financial backing, I think, and they could be successful. So that's Bronco Nation updates. We have another comment on potential teams. I think we already discussed this at Memphis, Tulane, and UTSA. I think that's a solid guess right there, a solid suggestion. And then we just have some other nice thoughts here as well. Go Broncos. I don't know if I'd ever thought I'd see the day here. We've got an Oregon State fan saying go Broncos. You know, crazy world of college sports that we're living in right now. Welcome to the PAC. So again, it's not all hate, but there is some out there, and it's definitely going to be a good one. The Oregon State Boise State rivalry already developing. I think that, I mean, we could talk about this for a quick second. That is probably one of the things I'm most excited about. Someone made a great comment on one of my videos, my most recent video talking about this, is that one of the best parts of moving into this new conference, at least with the size that it is right now, is that we get to play two of our main rivals, or what has been our main rivals, every single year. Fresno State, the milk can trophy, will be on the docket every single season instead of this rotational system because of the horrible job that the Mountain West did with their pod system, and where we didn't end up with any of our rivals. Also, San Diego State, there's rivalry opportunities there. I think there's a little bit of they have beaten us several times, and so there is that opportunity then. But just talk about Oregon State and Washington State. Wow, that's awesome to be able to be in the same conference with them, because there is definitely regional rivalry possibilities between those three fan bases in Boise State.
Absolutely, and regional rivalries are what put butts in seats. That's simple as that. If you want 6 games, 6 sellouts, you schedule your regional rivals. You know, and you look at Boise State in particular. I don't think they had a great. You can talk about the Fresno States of the world. They've had great games with Nevada and great games with UNLV, but their biggest rival was BYU. When you lose that game, we lost a ton. I mean, there's just not the same fervor. There's not the same – hate's not the right word, but there's just not the same competitive edge when you're playing a team that you really don't like. And BYU and Boise State don't like each other. I'd love to see that game get back on the schedule. And again, look, 6 games, 6 sellouts. If that's your goal, you got to schedule the teams that people want to see. And so let me throw this out there. Why isn't Boise State scheduling Idaho? I understand it's an FCS program, but they're playing Portland State here next week, right? Why aren't they scheduling Idaho? I've heard from so many people that would be a sellout every time you play that game. It just makes too much sense to me. You know, I know there's some personal feelings there. I know Idaho and Boise State fans, they don't really mix. It's oil and water, but I mean, I think that would be a great game. Right now, yeah, does Boise State dominate that game? More than likely, although Idaho's pretty darn good this year. But, I mean, Boise State wins that game more often than not. But if you want to sell out a game, if you're worried about your gates, your sales, that's a game that will sell out easily.
I know that obviously one of the great things that I have an opportunity to do with having this platform, with having this channel, is I get to bring on some of my childhood idols to come on, the Boise State players from the past to come and talk about Boise State football. And every single year I do a preseason preview series where I go through the offense, defense, special teams, and I bring on former players from each of those positional areas to talk about the team. And the first year that I was doing this series, I asked every player that came on what their thoughts were on the Boise State-Idaho rivalry, and if they was something they'd want to come back. And the vast majority of them, especially those that actually got to play in it and who grew up locally hearing about it and obviously being part of that rivalry as a fan and then as a player, almost every single one of them said that they wanted to bring that rivalry back. And so I don't love when we play FCS programs. I would wish that we never did. You know, maybe now that we're in the Pac-12 and it's a little bit of a tougher conference, I can accept it. But as a Mountain West program, I definitely didn't want us to. But hey, if we're going to play an FCS team, if that is a goal of the athletic department, I know that Jeremiah Dickey has said he wants to play one FCS team a year. If that is a goal, I agree with you. Go out and play a team like Idaho and bring in a little of that regional. And I know that this divides the fan base a bit. I know there's people that just say, you know, screw them up in Moscow, never play them again. But I think that there is enough people out there. I would guess a majority of the fan base I would love to see the Idaho rivalry come back. I know there's some people in the comments saying they don't want to see it, but I think that there's a majority of people out there that would love to see that one come back.
And getting back to your point here, I mean, Oregon State, Washington State, those are great additions to the schedule. You know, I know they're not top-end Power 5 programs, but those teams still have enough Power 5 talent on them that those are not gimme games by any means. I mean, I think Boise State's going to have to really work their butts off to win those games. Oregon State's got some really talented runners this year. You know, those are going to be tough games. So, and I think they're games that they're going to sell out. People want to see those teams. They know those names. You know, they're personally invested in those games. So I think they're great additions.
Well, again, I know a lot of people are still commenting on this topic, but we're going to move on. We're already hitting 43 minutes, and there's a lot more to talk about here. And I don't want this to be an hour and a half plus long video. Every time I say I don't want a video to be a certain time, it always ends up being that exact time. But, the hour and a half is probably the max that we're going to cut off here. So let's move on to talking about the rest of what we have to discuss here as well. I'm loving the engagement. This is awesome. I can see where a lot of other channels do this. This is a very exciting time to be able to have these live interactions with Boise State fans, especially for me, who doesn't get the of actually getting to live in Idaho myself with my job takes me to places. I am actually in the state of New Mexico right now when we talk about current potential additions to the Mountain West New Mexico State. However, moving on to discussing the rest of this video, we're going to talk about this Oregon game, and we're going to talk about what's next for Boise State. And so just real quick on the Oregon game, and we've already, I think you've written about it, if I'm right on that. I did a video breaking down the game and very in-depth. I do that after every matchup, my game preview and game review series. But just real quick here off the bat, first question I have for you, obviously it was a very, very close game, 34-37, Oregon winning in a walk-off field goal when they were favored by around 19 points, so three-ish touchdown, and I think ESPN was giving them like an 80% chance of winning this game, somewhere around that. Were you surprised by the results? This close game, a loss, but still a close game for Boise State.
Very much so. I was very surprised, especially given from what we saw from Boise State's defense in the opener. Georgia Southern's offense at times did whatever it wanted to against that Boise State defense, and they really, really, really tightened up in that week between those games, especially in the front. I was really impressed with how they pressured the quarterback. Ahmed Hassanin, Andrew Simpson, Jaden Virgin Morgan, those guys were in the backfield every snap. Dylan Gabriel never really felt comfortable. And we saw when he had time to pick him apart, he picked him apart. But those guys were in his face big time. I was really, really impressed with that defensive front.
How about Ashton Jeanty? Did you expect, obviously, not 6 touchdowns in the first game, 267 yards. Were you expecting the performance that he had against these future NFL first rounders for Oregon?
I'll say this. My 3 takeaways from that Oregon game. Number 1, Ashton Jeanty is legit. Ashton Jeanty is going to be in New York as a Heisman finalist. Is he going to win it? No one really knows yet. I mean, his biggest hurdle is the fact that he's not a quarterback in a Power 4 conference. 7 of the last 8 winners have been quarterbacks from the major conferences. But, man, what a special talent Ashton Jeanty is. Nobody can stop him. He's Barry Sanders-esque in the fact that the first guy never brings him down. He has amazing, amazing contact balance. I don't know how many times he's bounced off a tackler. I mean, he is number 1 in the nation, number 1 on draft boards. Mel Kiper last week he has him at 19 on his big board. He had him going at number 13 overall in his first mock draft. So I think the sky's the limit for Ashton Jeanty as long as he stays healthy. My second really big takeaway from that game, Boise State's offensive line is legit as well. We saw it in the opener. They were opening massive holes for Ashton Jeanty. Those guards on the inside, Ben Dooley, Roger Carrion, which I know had the unfortunate injury, but Ben Dooley, Jake Steele, I mean, these guys, Cage Casey at left tackle, these guys are just opening massive, massive holes. And they did the same thing against a very good defensive line in Oregon. I mean, that defensive line probably has 3 or 4 draft picks on it right now. And they stood up against that group. So if that group can be a little healthy this week, Mason Randolph is banged up. I think Carrion's probably done for this season. I haven't heard that officially, but off the record, I've heard like broken leg and he may not be back. So that hurts a little bit. But I mean, Zach Holmes came in and did a great job at center. You got Tyler Knopf that can play some guard. You got some other guys that can play guard there. So you've got some depth this year, but that offensive line is playing like monsters, and Jeanty needs them to if he's going to win that Heisman.
Great positives from that game. Obviously, Ashton Jeanty's performance, he was so big that if Boise State had lost by multiple scores, his performance in that game was still big enough to carry him. And the fact that we were so close to winning, there were so many eyeballs on that game, it was a perfect time for him to really fully take the lead in that Heisman discussion. We'll talk about that here in a second when we get to the later half of this video. But one point that is well made for Boise State, and the offense was great. The defense, I wouldn't say that it was, incredible defense when you talk about Boise State defenses of the past, but compared to that Georgia Southern game, night and day, and effort that they had overall was incredible. They only allowed 23 points. But on that note, this is a good point here. Oregon only scored 1 touchdown on offense in the second half. And so we're going to talk about some negatives here real quick. Should Boise State fans be concerned about a special teams unit that was supposed to be so much stronger this year. Last year, one of the worst in the country, but Stacey Collins comes back. The dirt cutter of special teams comes back to Boise State, and we allow an 80-plus yard punt return for a touchdown and a 100-plus yard kick return for a touchdown. I have never seen that happen at the same time in one game. Should Boise State fans be concerned right now about this special teams going forward the rest of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked to see that the special teams kind of fall flat on its face in that game, especially at Boise State. This is a program that's been known for special teams for so many years. You know, is there concern? Certainly. Anytime you give up 2 special teams touchdowns in a game, that's a concern. But it's tough to know sometimes what you're seeing on special teams. It's such a lightning in a bottle type of play. You know, you can be in the right position, but that guy's still going to make a play. It's just a huge part of the game, and it's unfortunate that they let them down, but all you can do is move forward. You know, Stacey Collins is a great coach. This is a guy that's coached all over the country. He said he's won everywhere he's gone, so he's going to get it right. But I mean, it's a shock. It's a concern. What's a bigger concern for me in the first 2 weeks of the season is the secondary. A secondary that I thought would be much, much, much improved. I mean, we saw Jeremiah Irby look like Deion Sanders out there in the spring ball and in fall camp, and he's just done nothing. I mean, he's gotten torched in both games. He's really struggled in man-to-man coverage. That surprised me a lot. McCoy's kind of gotten beat a couple times. You know, we saw the safety Tubner go out in the last game. It turns out that targeting call has actually been overturned, so he's not going to serve a suspension, which is nice. But it's just, I really saw the secondary taking huge steps this year in terms of being a lockdown unit. There's so much experience there. Benefield has some good games, but he got burnt on a big route in the opener. It just makes you wonder, is it the players or is it the scheme at this point? You know, our Boise State's coach is just not giving the corners enough help. You know, I've had Spencer Nansen in the past that said to me that this is a program where they want their corners on an island. He wants to put them on the field and talk to them later. You know, maybe that's not sustainable. Maybe you're going to have to do some more soft coverages. Maybe you're going to have to keep some more safeties deep to help those corners. You know, because at this point, you know, we just don't know if it's the talent or if it's the scheme. We saw the talent shine in practice, but the talent is not showing off in the game so far. So, I mean, either Jeremiah Irby and Mario McCoy really got to step it up, or the coaches got to get them some help.
Yeah, I think what helped in the Oregon game, and it was my number one key to the game, and it was something that I talked about coming into this season, is that Boise State blitzed more against Oregon. Mm-hmm. You didn't see it as much versus Georgia Southern, but versus Oregon, 4 sacks. They'd had a 5th one if he hadn't broken free. And so for Boise State, obviously you talk about, it's disappointing that you can't go out there and play coverage and give your guys time, and they can go out and make the tackles and make the interceptions and deflections. But Boise State schematically getting that second game coming in and blitzing more. And yeah, you're going to give up big plays. You had on the jailbreak, you had the wide receiver running open for a touchdown. And there were a couple other plays that were either deep completions or could have been deep completions if the pass had been made. But I did like what I saw overall, schematically shifting to more of a blitz focus that I think at least gave Boise State the big play opportunity. If you can sack him for that lost yardage and now create a 3rd and long type situation. But for Boise State fans, I think there is one area, if we're going to look at the defense and say this will be a concern we need to keep an eye on and see if these players can step up. There is another area that Boise State fans weren't particularly impressed with, and we're going to talk about a little bit more the controversy in the second bit of this video. But just right off the bat, and do you think that Boise State fans should be concerned about this passing game?
Yes and no. I say no because Cam Camper has come out and has played as advertised. I mean, he's been great through the first 2 weeks. You know, Chris Marshall was really solid in that first game. Didn't see much out of him here against Oregon. I think he was a little bit banged up. I think Cable's got a little bit banged up there in the second half. But, you know, there is some concern there, but I'm not overly concerned. And I say that because of the running game. You know, sometimes as a quarterback, you got to accept that you don't have to be the star of the show. You don't have to make all the plays. And when you've got an Ashton, Jeanty, and a Sire Gaines and a Breezy Dubar to hand the ball off to, all they need Maddox Maston to do is be a game manager and not lose games for them. If you've got that kind of offensive line, those running backs, you make 4 or 5 good passes a game. You don't have to hit every pass. You don't have to hit every back shoulder throw. You just got to not make the mistakes that lose you games. You know, one of the most famous examples of this from the NFL, Ty Detmer for the Ravens early 2000s, the ultimate game manager of a quarterback led them to a Super Bowl because they had an amazing running back, they had an amazing defense. So sometimes as a quarterback, you got to lean on that, and that's hard to accept. That from the fans, you don't see the flashy numbers, especially when we saw what Taylor Green did this past weekend at Arkansas. He put up all those numbers, but Maddox Madsen just isn't that quarterback. So am I screaming for a quarterback change? Absolutely not. I think they made their choice. They're going to ride with that choice until he loses them a game, which he hasn't done yet. So, I mean, has he had 400 yards passing and 5 touchdowns? No. Has he had the most impressive completion percentage in the world? No. But he also hasn't lost them games. He's thrown a couple interceptions. He's missed a couple passes, but he's hit some solid passes as well. So, I don't think there's that much to be gained by bringing in Malachi Nelson, right away. Now, that being said, if Madsen doesn't come out against Portland State and have a great game, the conversation changes. It changes big time. Because I've always said that I think Malachi Nelson long-term is your answer. He's just got those physical tools. Madsen has more between the ears right now. So right now, you got to stick with Madsen. It is his job. We learned last year what happens if you flip-flop, if you go back and forth. No one gets comfortable. No one gets in a groove, and they both play worse. So you stick with the guy that you started with until he loses you games, and then you make the move.
And we'll talk about this quarterback battle a little bit later here in the video. But and if anybody's looking for a more in-depth breakdown of the passing game for Boise State in that game versus Oregon, again, I encourage you to go check out my game review for Boise State versus Oregon. But I think that moving here into the last phase of this, and you do make some good points on Boise State with the defensive improvements that we've seen on that defensive line and the sacks that we had, and offensive line being so exciting, and the running back room being so exciting for Boise State. You take a team, a top 10 team on the road in their home stadium where they were angry and looking for a win, and they barely eke one out, and you have the offensive performance that you did, and you show improvements on defense, and you've got some questions on special teams, sure. But the question I have for you as we move into this second part, and this is a good bridge into that, and we will get to people's comments and questions here in a second, but as we get into that second point, and this is a good bridge to that, is this a top 25 team right now? You used to be an AP voter that was part of making these decisions. So if do you have Boise State right now on your top 25 ballot, or do they have more to prove?
I think they're right there on the cusp. I think if I was still voting, I'd have them somewhere in that 20 to 25 range, I believe. In my opening ballot, they were 24 on that ballot. They haven't done anything to convince me they deserve to fall. And I'll say this. That game against Oregon, even though they didn't win, in my mind, it solidifies them as the favorite to get that 5th spot in the CFP this year. Because to take Oregon on down to the wire the way they did, I can see them now going 11-1. And 11-1 with a loss to a top 10 team, that gets you in. That most definitely gets you in. So are they a top 25 team? That's debatable. But are they the favorite to get that 5th automatic qualifier? In my opinion, they are.
Well, we're going to move on to talking about this next section for Boise State, the hashtag what's next, moving through the rest of the season. Before we do, we'll go back and touch on a couple of comments that we haven't brought up so far. There's a whole debate going on right now in the comment thread section about Peacock versus the CW and some other things, and we're not going to go into discussing that, but I will just throw this up here because Linda has a great point. That was just a terrible broadcasting performance. It was almost worse than ESPNU. At least we got to see the first bit of the game, so maybe not worse. But yeah, that's not the move going forward. I don't like them being not on the national scale. So even if it had been a perfect broadcast, I still would have been happy. And it definitely was not. I almost canceled. I get like a free Peacock subscription through like my telephone service or something like that. But I almost just canceled it just out of spite. It was bad.
It was so bad. The commentary was bad. The resolution was bad. The technical difficulties were bad. You understand why Peacock did it. They're trying to get a game that's going to have national attention. But I hated it, man. I did. I canceled Peacock right after that game was done. I had it, man. Give me ESPNU all day, any day, every day over Peacock. I'll take it. It was the worst. I'm with you, Linda. Never again on Peacock.
One more thing I do want us to talk about before we move on to just focusing here on the rest of the Boise State season. What about this Oregon team? I mean, this is a good point here. The national media is playing down Oregon and saying that it was Oregon's having a bad opening to the season. They did have a very rough game versus Idaho, but I think that was because of other reasons, mostly just overlooking, undervaluing. I thought I saw a good Oregon team and a good Boise State team going head to head. Was it a top 5 Oregon team? No, but was it an Oregon team that deserves be in that top 10 to 13 discussion? I thought so. What were your thoughts on Oregon? And do you think that this is a team that themselves ends up in the playoffs at the end of the year?
I mean, I'm pretty shocked by Oregon's performances to start the season, to be honest. They were number 3 on my preseason ballot, and this roster is loaded with talent. I mean, Oregon had 7 players drafted in this year's draft. They could have that many drafted again next year. It's just that loaded. Ted Stewart, the receiver, is going to be a first-round pick. They have a couple of DBs that are first, second-round type of guys. James Stewart, the running back, is going to get drafted. Dylan Gabriel could get drafted. I mean, there's so many NFL draft picks on that roster. I really thought they'd be in contention for a national title. Obviously, I was wrong. A lot of guys were wrong. What's the issue there? I don't know. Maybe there's just too many cooks in the kitchen. Maybe guys aren't respecting Dylan Gabriel. He's a guy that's been a lot of places, won a lot of games, but he's never wowed the country over. He's never been Quinn Ewers and throwing the ball over the field. So maybe he's not the guy. Maybe there's a reason he's bounced around all over the place. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, they really haven't hit their stride. And that's not taking anything away from Boise State. Boise State played a game for the ages against Oregon. Even if Oregon was at its best, Boise State was going to be in that game. That's just how it was. But I'm shocked the way this Oregon season has played out. I really thought they'd be 3-0 right now, still a top 5 team, but now they're struggling to be in the top 10.
Well, I'm not necessarily doom and gloom when it comes to Oregon. I thought that they'd made good adjustments in the second half overall. I mean, we were running right through them in the first half. Ashton Jeanty had a couple really nice breakout runs. Obviously, that 70-yard touchdown that's just been all over social media demonstrating his speed. But he wasn't consistently going out and getting 5+ yards every play. And so I thought defensively they did a good job. I thought run blocking, they were great. That could be a reflection against Boise State, but pretty much anytime they should just come out and run the ball every play, because anytime they wanted to run the ball, they were getting 6+ yards every carry. Dylan Gabriel's sacks took away from their overall rushing numbers, but it was a great running game for them. So the only big question marks I had watching that game was obviously the pass rush. They were pass blocking. They were letting that through almost every time. He was always under pressure, and then just they didn't seem to have the chemistry with the receivers. A couple overthrown balls there, and maybe not looking to some open receivers on the deep routes. But overall, I think this is a good Oregon team. I don't think they're as good as people thought they were to start the season, but I still think this is a good team that will be right up there in contention towards the end of the year. For discussion of being a Big Ten rep or maybe an at-large spot to the playoffs. But let's talk about this Boise State team. We've already talked about them being potentially a top 25 worthy program. And we've talked about them after that game. They're the front runner. I think that we are thinking that for that playoff spot. But do you think that this is a team that has a lot of other sharks in the water out there? Are there any other group of 5 programs that you think present a legitimate threat to Boise State's chances to go out and win that CFP? Or not win the CFP, but get to the CFP.
I mean, Memphis still is a threat for them. I know they have a big game this weekend, but Memphis is still up there. Liberty is still up there. Tulane, they had that close loss to Kansas State. I mean, one more loss for them, and it's done. I think they have a powerful opponent this week, so they could be out. I mean, Texas State is still up there. That they really handled UTSA last week. I mean, that was a big win for them. So, right now Memphis is probably there. Memphis and Liberty are their top contention still. But I would say Boise State is right there. I mean, I really see now, if they play the way they did against Oregon for the rest of the season, they're going to go 11-1. Now, is that guaranteed? Absolutely not. As I mentioned before, Oregon State, Washington State, those are not going to be gimme games. They're not going to be easy wins. UNLV is not going to be an easy win. Wyoming in late November is never easy. So, I mean, they could very easily slip up and lose 1, even 2 of those games. I mean, so it's possible. But the effort and the execution that I saw against Oregon makes me comfortable that they're going to be 11-1, 10-2 at the very worst. So, I mean, really it's going to come down to, does Liberty lose a game? We thought they were going to lose to New Mexico State. They're going to be out of the conversation. They sneaked out that win. So, I mean, App State's coming up for them. That's going to be a tough game for them. So, but yeah, right now, Memphis, Liberty, Boise State, those are your top 3 teams. That next tier, I would say Tulane, Texas State, they're still in the mix a little bit there. But Memphis, they got a tough one this weekend, right? I think they're at Florida State this weekend. It's going to be a tough game for them. So that could take them out right there.
And that's a good point. I mean, you look at Boise State, and I said on my channel after the review, I was really pumped up after that game. Even though it was a loss, it was not what I was expecting, and it gave me a lot of hope, like you're talking about, for Boise State. But I said, hey, we are the front runner for the CFP right now. And other people made some good points. They said, hey, Northern Illinois won their top 10 game this week versus Notre Dame. They should be ahead of you. And I think there is a good point here, is that Boise State has played their premier game. They have played the game that was circled on the schedule. I mean, obviously, you have some good in-conference games. You have Oregon State, Washington State, which are now future in-conference games, and those were going to present a challenge, obviously. However, the big game is gone. Most of these other programs either have Power 5 or Power 4 teams still on the docket, clear cut, like not in the gray area with Oregon State, Washington State, but clear cut Power 4 teams on the docket, or they still have their big team left to play. You know, Northern Illinois, they beat Notre Dame in a shocker, which I think said a lot more about what Notre Dame was than it did about Northern Illinois. Notre Dame did not look good in that game, but they still got to go play NC State, who was recently ranked. I know that they got destroyed by Tennessee, but they were recently ranked. Memphis has to go play Florida State, as Clint points out here. JMU, your alma mater, they have to go play North Carolina. Liberty, they don't really have to play anybody, but I will say this off the bat: I don't think Liberty is getting contention for this. A lot of people, everybody should know, or maybe you're new to the channel, you don't know. I'm also a Liberty fan. I'm a Boise State and Liberty fan. I wanted to go to Boise State, but they didn't have Air Force ROTC, and so I found that out when I went to apply, actually. So then I just kind of typed in, Christian schools ROTC. Liberty came up. I had some family in Virginia. I went there. So I'm a huge Liberty fan and Boise State fan. I watch all of Liberty's games. Liberty looks like garbage this year. They almost lost to Campbell. If you just looked at the box score and you didn't watch the game, they were very close in that game to losing to Campbell, who is not a good FCS team. And they got the luckiest break of their life being able to beat New Mexico State. I see 1, 2, maybe 3 losses coming for Liberty throughout the rest of the season. And even if they don't, let's say they do go undefeated throughout the rest of the year, they're not going to get the nod, the favorable nod after what they put up versus Oregon last season. I mean, they got in a circumstances, and I've covered this. I wrote about this, actually. I do write some articles occasionally for Liberty-centric sports sites. But I wrote about this for Liberty. I said they didn't get in because they were the best team. They were just the least bad team of the options available. It was a really weird time for the group of 5, where it was the first time ever that nobody deserved to go. There was nobody that had a clear-cut case. There was nobody that had that big Power 4 win. There was nobody that deserved to go. SMU and Liberty had the 2 best cases, but SMU had lost both of their Power 4 games, and Liberty was undefeated with no Power 4 wins. And so Liberty got the nod, but that's not the norm. The playoff committee was not saying you just have to go undefeated to get in. Strength of schedule is still important to them, and Liberty is one of the worst in the country. And so I discount them as being a factor for this playoff fit. But, UNLV, they're playing Kansas right now. Boise State will get a chance to go head-to-head with them. And then, obviously, like we said, JMU, they still had to play UNC, and they didn't look great versus Gardner-Webb, and so who knows how good that program is this year either. So this is a wide-open race, but I think Boise State has the easiest path right now. NIU, I don't see them going undefeated throughout the rest of the season. Boise State I think they are setting themselves up with what they've done so far to be in that national limelight. All eyes on them. They just have to go out and capitalize on it. And so Boise State, I'm very excited about what they can do the rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're the favorite. Just be aware that nothing less than 10-2 gets them in. Yeah. 9-3 does not get them in. So you can have a slip up, but 10-2 in a Mountain West championship is your absolute floor. You cannot go any lower than that. Now, and I'll say this: I agree with you on Liberty's strength of schedule. It is absolute garbage. But at the same time, when voters see teams that are 10-0, 11-0, potentially 12-0. That weighs heavily on their mind. I mean, even if it's a garbage schedule, that weighs on their mind. That is part of why Liberty got that game against Oregon last year. So if they go undefeated, Boise State needs to be 11-1 to be in that conversation. So I'm with you. My gut feeling is that Boise State gets that nod. But I'm telling you, they got some games coming up that they're just not all gimme games. Oregon State's going to give them a game. They got a really talented running backfield, a really good defense. They shut out San Diego State last week. So I think Oregon State's going to be a tough game. And that Wyoming game in Laramie, Wyoming's a bad team right now, but Wyoming always plays Boise State tough. It's going to be absolutely freezing in Laramie in late November. That's a losable game. And so you got Wyoming, and then you end the season with Oregon State, right? That's 2 tough late games. So, I can see them dropping one of those games, but I think you're right. Liberty's going to have to go undefeated and hope they get some favorable votes. Memphis is going to have to shock the world. Tulane's going to have to shock the world. NIU would be an absolute shocker, to anyone. Boise State is the favorite right now, but just nothing below 10-2 is going to get it done.
Well, talking about some favorable votes, let's talk about a situation that someone has put forward, something that I think they deserve to go out and win based on their body of work. But being a group of 5 player, they're going to need to get some favorable votes. get them into the final conversation. That's Ashton Jeanty. His performance so far throughout the season has been absolutely incredible. Somebody put out a statistics, and I'm sorry that I'm not remembering it right now, but somebody put out a statistic that he has more yards total rushing than that a lot of college football teams have total on the season so far, like total rushing or just total offense. Ashton Jeanty, 9 touchdowns, the first Mountain West player to ever do that. The first college football player since 1995 to have 9 rushing touchdowns in his first 2 games. And we're not talking about him going out and playing, Portland State and Georgia Southern, or even going Texas Tech and Georgia Southern. He went out and played Georgia Southern and Oregon. He went out and played that top 10 team, and we're having this discussion about him having 9 touchdowns and 400 plus rushing yards. First question I have for you before we talk about ramifications is, can he keep this up? Teams they're already ready for him, so they're not stopping him. Obviously, it's, assuming that he's injury free and knock on all the wood that you can, but can he maintain this pace throughout the rest of the year?
I think he can for a couple points. Number one, one of the most the strongest aspects of Ashton's game is catching the ball out of the backfield, and he hasn't had to do that yet. I mean, he's been so explosive just with the ball in his hands that he hasn't had to do that. So we're going to see more of that as the season goes on, as they have to get creative ways to get him the ball. But number two is that offensive line. If that O-line can keep playing the way it has, that's going to make his life so much easier. It's going to get him into the Heisman conversation big time. And just think about when you're that kind of an explosive athlete, when you're that powerful, when you're running through gaping holes that are that big, you don't have to worry about breaking a tackle up the line of scrimmage. You're looking at that DB, you're looking at that linebacker and going, okay, how am I going to beat that guy? It's just amazing to see him play so effortlessly. He's maybe one of the most physically dominant players that I've ever covered. I mean, in my career, it's just when he showed up as a freshman, he looked like a grown man. Now he looks like some sort of WWE superstar out there, just bulging veins and no neck and just running people over and hurdling dudes. So I think he is very much in the conversation right now. And I think he's going to be in New York at the end of the season. He's going to be there with guys like Carson Beck, like Cam Ward, some of these guys that are in that conversation as well. I think the way Ashton Jeanty plays, the physicalness, the elusiveness, is just next level all day. He's going to be this love it right now, Boise State fans, because he's gone at the end of the year. His name is going to be called in the NFL draft next year. He very well might be the first running back off the board. So he's a special talent. And not only have we seen him be really impressive running the ball, his pass blocking is so much improved this year. There were 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks where he's had a crackback block. He's had a block in the backfield that have saved a play. So he's just all around amazing talent. Just watch out in I'd say the second half of the season, he's going to catch a lot of passes because teams are going to key on him. The Boys are going to have to find ways to get him the ball. Dirk Cutter knows exactly what he's doing. It's going to be a special year, no doubt. He's top 3 Heisman finalist, bar none.
That is a fantastic point about the receiving. And I thought that we were going to have to move towards that in the Oregon game because I had faith that our offensive line was going to be good and that the running game was going to be good. But I didn't expect that it was going to be, almost 200 yards rushing by Ashton Jeanty, over 200 yards in the game for Boise State, 221 yards total rushing, good against an Oregon defense. So I expected to see him more out of the backfield, which we did last year. I mean, that's a great point. Last season, 2023, 569 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, average 13.2 yards per catch. That was a big emphasis versus Washington. We saw him out of the backfield catching passes so many times versus them. But this year, 5 receptions, 12 yards, 2.4 yard average per reception so far. It has not been a point of emphasis. It hasn't been a focus. I think some could argue that maybe at times it should have been in the game versus Oregon. They were leaving him back to pass block and going to that 5 wide, and maybe a slip out pass to Ashton Jeanty would have been a little bit more effective. But that is going to be a part of his game. I mean, that hasn't gone away. He still has those skills. He's a great pass catching back. And so you're right. Eventually teams will somehow maybe find a way to bottle him up. When I say bottle him up, I'll hold him to under 150 yards. And then at that point, they're going to have to go to the passing game a little more, and then he'll explode in that as well. So he is a running back for Boise State that I've been excited about Boise State players all my life. I loved what Kellen Moore did. I loved what Ian Johnson did. But at the end of the day, you weren't seeing Kellen Moore and saying, I objectively think that he is going to be out there winning the Heisman. We were excited that he got to the podium. Did he deserve to? Yes. winningest quarterback in college football history, everything that he did yardage-wise, touchdown-wise, yes, greatest player of all time for Boise State with his total production, his 4 years of play, 100%. But at the end of the day, you just knew that it wasn't going to work out. The media talk wasn't there. People loved him, but they didn't love him Heisman-wise. They didn't love him NFL draft-wise. He just didn't have that perspective. Ian Johnson, same way. They loved what he did versus Oklahoma, but he wasn't that level caliber running back that was going to end up in New York, at least winning the Heisman. I think 7th in the Heisman voting is where he finished there. But Ashton,
I'll say this. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, 1 second. But Ashton Jeanty has us in a completely different spot as a fan base looking at him, because not only are we seeing it and we're going, he's the greatest player in the world. Obviously, we're looking through our Boise State glasses. But not only are we saying that, but major NFL draft analysts, major media representatives on and off of the official and unofficial sides of the media are coming out and saying, this Ashton Jeanty kid is something special. He is a Heisman contender. RG3 is saying he's the #1 Heisman contender. Manziel says he thinks he's a #1 Heisman contender. These guys are all looking at him not just as a Heisman contender, but also as an NFL back and as a future first rounder potential starter right off the bat in the NFL. And obviously, it's all in the media space. It's all about that money. And if you can link a player to the Heisman and then to the NFL and to the future, you're gonna have a lot more investment and buy-in into him by the media reps as well. And so for Boise State, this is not only the best chance that we've had to go out and get the Heisman just with the eyes that are on Boise State, but I think because of what Ashton Jeanty is by himself, but for the first time ever, he's somehow breaking through that group of 5 East Coast media bias and winning the acclaim. And I think for right now, for me, he is my favorite. If he does what he's done so far, the first 2 games, total yardage wise, maybe not all running, but if he does what he does all the way through the year, he is going to win the Heisman. And I'm saying that as objectively as I possibly can, wearing all blue and an Ashton Jeanty hat and an Ashton Jeanty shirt. As objectively as I possibly can, I believe he's going to go win that Heisman.
That Ashton Jeanty hat, by the way, is my favorite Boise State hat that's come out lately. I'm excited to be able to buy one here soon. I really like that. But I'll say this about Ashton Jeanty. He's a guy that's got all the skills to do it. He has the line to do it. What he needs to put him over the top of the Heisman race is for one of his teammates, one of the receivers, to really step up and take some pressure off of his shoulders. Whether that's Chris Marshall, whether it's Prince Strawn, Latrell Cables, one of these guys has got to become a consistent threat down the field so defenses aren't keen on Ashton Jeanty every play. Because eventually it's going to happen. You're going to see 8, 9, 10 guys in the box, and life is going to become hard for Ashton Jeanty. You've got to have that passing game, that deep threat to kind of pair with him. So really, if Chris Marshall could really step out these next few games and play to his potential, that would make life so much easier for an Ashton Jeanty. But I agree with you. He's my favorite right now. No one's even close right now. Just when he touches the ball, something special is going to happen. He can score from anywhere on the field. He's my favorite to be in New York at the end of the year.
Final portion of this video before we move on to closing thoughts here and any additional thoughts from the fans or from us that we want to throw out there. You mentioned that the passing game, the receiving game has to step up. That Cam Campers, Chris Marshall, Prince Strawn, such a huge part of the end of last year and of fall camp, and I don't think we've really seen him reach his potential. Didn't have an exceptional game versus Oregon. Did have a play that I thought was a reception that just wasn't ruled that way, but do you think that it is going to require, and I know that we're not saying right this moment there is a quarterback controversy, but do you think that it is going to require Malachi Nelson stepping up, reaching the potential that many people thought that he had coming into this season? Do you think that it's going to take Malachi Nelson jumping into the starting role for this passing game to reach its full potential, or do you think that they are capable of reaching that under Maddox Madsen?
No, I think they're capable of being under Maddox. Like I said, I love Malachi Nelson's arm. His talent, his arm strength, his accuracy is amazing. But Maddox is the guy that the team rallies around right now. Maddox is the guy that's more comfortable in the pocket, and that's more important than a strong arm. When you're comfortable in the pocket, you're on time. You're playing within the script. You're not trying to make Superman plays all the time. Maddox Madsen right now is the guy that gives you the best chance not to lose games. Maybe he's not going to win games for you, but he's not going to throw bad picks that lose games for you. I think right now it's more on the receivers themselves. They've got to create separation. They've got to go up and win those 50-50 balls. They've got to come down with those passes that they've been just an inch off on. It's on those guys right now. Maddox Masson really hasn't played that bad. Yeah, he had a pick in the opener. He threw the 2-point conversion. That was a pick. But I really think Maddox is a solid quarterback. And again, with a running game the way that like Boise State's, all he has to do is not lose the game. All he has to do is make the simple plays consistently. He doesn't have to put the team on his back. He doesn't have to throw 70-yard touchdown passes. He's got to trust Ashton and Jeanty to get them in position, and he's got to not lose games. He's got to make good decisions. Now, the whole thing about Malachi Nelson, competition brings out the best in everyone. I mean, so the better Malachi gets, the better it is for everyone, because that's going to push Maddox in practice. That's going to make him sharper mentally, physically. I think that's going to help. But if you make a change, there's no going back, in my opinion. Like we saw the last couple of years, when you don't settle on a starting quarterback, it throws the whole offense into chaos. So if they go to Malachi Nelson, they got to stay with Malachi Nelson. If they're going to stick to Maddox Masson this season, they got to stick to their guns no matter what. Because I just think it's so hard on the offense to be switching quarterbacks around. So it's Maddox's job right now, and in my opinion, it's his job until he loses it, until he plays so bad that they have to take him off the field. In my opinion, I just don't think they can afford to make a bunch of changes the way they did last year. We saw the effect it had on Talon and Maddox last year. I mean, I talked to Maddox, and he said it's so hard to come into the game and be on the bench cold and be thrown right into the fire. It's tough to do, And with Talon was one of those athletes where you have to let him get into a groove. You've got to tailor your scheme to his strengths. And Boise State never did that. The moment he had a couple missed passes, they were pulling him. They're bringing in Maddox Masson. That stays in the back of your mind, and you can't be the best quarterback you can be if you're worried about coming off the field. So you got to pick a starter and stick with that starter.
Now, with a bye week to prepare, a game last week, like I said, that wasn't necessarily the best in the passing game, but I think that you're right. I think there were a lot of issues there that weren't necessarily Maddox Masson's fault. I think you saw someone mentioned it earlier, good defense by Oregon. I mean, it was really tight windows that Boise State that Maddox Masson was having to throw into. The receivers themselves weren't getting that great of separation. And you have to remember, like we talk about this passing game, we talk about how great this receiver core is. And just on paper, I mean, this is one of the greatest wide receiver corps Boise State's ever have. I mean, they have potential to match right up there with the 2009 wide receiver recruit classes, and of course for Boise State on paper. But I think you look at that, and you look at that potential. You still have to remember that is potential. Most of these guys have limited to no playing experience, and almost all of them are making their first primary reps for Boise State. I mean, last year, the leading wide receiver for Boise State was Eric McAllister. He's not here anymore. He's at TCU. Year before that, Latrell Caples, but then he spent a year injured. So even though Latrell Caples comes back as a senior, he hasn't played in a year. And so, and he's coming back to a completely different quarterback. And because it wasn't even Taylor Green back then. It was, so it was Bachmeier. And so this system has been very, very confusing for a lot of the wide receivers that are currently on the team. And now you have Maddox Masson stepping up, and it was a quarterback battle throughout camp. So you didn't have the same guy throwing to you every single practice that you were out there building that chemistry and that reps. And so I think there's benefits to the quarterback battle because you make sure your best guy wins, but at the same time, it does hurt the wide receivers because they don't have that opportunity to build that chemistry with one guy. And so I think that you look at this Boise State wide receiver core going throughout the rest of the season, Maddox Masson, he has all the tools to be successful. I mean, does he have the greatest arm in college football? No. Is he going to be an NFL starter? Definitely not. He's a college guy. He's going to play well, and then he'll probably go into, coaching or something like that, or do whatever he wants to do outside of football. But he has a very, very competent arm. He's very, very accurate with the football. And more importantly than any of that, he is a great game manager. He has that awareness piece. I'm not going to compare him to Kellen Moore, but the greatest part of Kellen Moore's game was that he was so smart on the field with the football. And so I think that throughout the rest of the years, we see the wide receiver core start to gel. I think that we're going to see an increase in a pickup from this passing game just naturally, whether or not you throw whether you throw Malachi Nelson out there or not. I think that Maddox Masson and the wide receivers will start to gel. The wide receivers will become more comfortable with the offense, and you're going to see a pickup from this passing game overall. However, we are both saying that we don't think that there's been anything happen so far to demand a quarterback change, and we're saying right now that we don't expect there to be a new starter for Boise State versus Portland State or versus Washington. However, you've had a whole bye week to continue to have this quarterback practice in these quarterback battles. And Spencer Danielson was clear that the quarterback battle is going to continue throughout the season. And other commentators have said that Malachi Nelson has the pieces. He just ran out of time. So you've had a bye week to prepare. And now you have an FCS team that you're playing against. Do you not start him? I'm not saying he's going to start. Max Madsen will start that game. But do you see him get some significant reps to just kind of assess where he's at as a playmaker for Boise State?
Yeah, I think this next game is the one where he could see some time. Now, not in certain packages. I see him getting some time in mop-up duty against Portland State. If Boise State's up 3 touchdowns in the second half, you bring in Malachi and see what he can do. But I just don't think you take Madsen off the field for 1 series or 2 series, 1 play. I just think that's too tough for a quarterback to overcome. This is Madsen's job right now. And it all comes down to his mentality on the field. He's very competitive. He plays with a chip on his shoulder, but he's calm. When Max Madsen has the ball in his hands, he looks comfortable in the pocket. He's going through his progression. Malachi this fall just didn't look that comfortable. He almost regressed from the spring to fall camp in terms of being comfortable in the pocket, making the right decisions. He was a second slow on a lot of decisions where Madsen knew what he was doing. And to Madsen's credit, he's been here longer. He knows the offense. He should know what he's doing more. But I just think Mad Dog is that kind of player where he knows that he doesn't have the physical capabilities, so he's got to win with his mind, just like a Kellen Moore. He's got to win with his mind. He's tough enough to run the ball when he needs to. I think Malachi sees some snaps this week, but unless Mad Dog falls off a cliff, it's his job to lose. And I'll say this about the receivers. I've been really impressed with Cam Camper. This is a guy that I really liked in fall camp. He's versatile. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. He's a deep threat. He's a really precise route runner, and he's a great story, too. I mean, this is a guy that took a year off after high school, went the JUCO route, spent a couple years in Indiana where he showed glimpses of what he can do, and now he knows this is his last chance. This is it for him. There is no next season for him, so he's going to ball out every game. I can see him, having a big year, and honestly, at this point, if things stay the way they are, I can see him being Boise State's leading receiver at the end of the year. I wouldn't have said that a month ago. I really thought Chris Marshall was going to come in here and just dominate. And he's had some flashes, but he hasn't been dominant yet. He hasn't been that next level NFL guy we think he can be. But Cam Camper is a guy that is just, he's long more than tall. You look at Cam Camper, and I think he is probably 6'2"-ish, but his arms are so long. He can go up and get those high balls. He runs such good routes. He's tough to cover man to man. I think he's going to continue to have a really big role. The question is, who steps up around him? Latrell Cable's had a really good first half in both the first 2 games of the season, but he's disappeared in the second half. Chris Marshall has been streaky. Prince Strong, I think, has only had like 2 or 3 targets, and he really hasn't had that much. Austin Bolt had 1 big catch, really hasn't been consistent there. So who's going to be that guy that steps up around him? And, we heard so much about the tight ends, Matt Lauder. He's really got some solid down the field ability. Where has that been in the first 2 weeks? So I just think with wide receivers, it can't be a one-man band. You don't have LeBron James out there. You've got to have some help there. I love the duo of Caples and Camper, but they really need Marshall to step up on the opposite side of the field to take some pressure off those guys. If he can step up, they're going to see more open lanes. They're going to see more one-on-one coverage. So I think Marshall's got to play up to his potential, and Camper's just got to keep doing what he's doing.
I 100% agree. Cam Camper really excites me. The tape that he put out in my preview or my review of Boise State signing class, I was really excited by. I said then, and I've continued to say it now, that he reminds me of Austin Pettis in a lot of ways. He's his own player, but he's Pettis-like in a lot of things. He's leading the team right now with 151 yards receiving. Obviously had that great touchdown, which was a great pass from Max Madsen in the corner of the end zone, that flag route versus Oregon. But I agree with you. I think that the wide receiver, the passing game, maybe, again, part of it's just the fact that the running game has been so dominant, but we needed the passing game the second half versus Oregon. It wasn't necessarily there. Portland State gives you that great opportunity for a little bit of a reset, a little bit of an opportunity to come out. And, you know that your offensive line should be able to go out and dominate against them. And you should have a strong running game. And so if it takes a little bit of pressure off of your primary offense, you can go out and be maybe a little bit more pass-centric versus Portland State and really get this passing game into a rhythm, not necessarily be the offense that you're going to see the rest of the year, but it gives you an opportunity to come out with a little bit more of an air raid type attack and just see what your wide receivers can do versus a little bit lower level competition to see if they can build some of that chemistry. So yeah, I will go more into that next week when I preview the Portland State game. So everybody that's stuck around so far, thanks so much for watching. Again, as always, make sure that you like and subscribe so you don't miss out. That'll be a great preview for the Portland State game. I'm really excited about some of the things that Boise State can do to tweak and improve this team before they head up versus Washington State. Before we wrap up, and we're right there at an hour and 27, I did it again. I said I don't want to go an hour and a half plus, and we're definitely going to just at least go slightly past. So prophetic in that nature. But before we end this video here, I have a couple of starred comments I'm going to go back and we'll show as well. But do you, in the comment section, this is your last chance to throw out any kind of questions or comments that you have. But Ron, do you have anything else here at the end of this video as we're wrapping up?
Well, today is a special day in Boise State lore. I mean, it's the 38th birthday of the blue turf, the Smurf turf out there. I mean, Jacob, I know you're a guy. Last name, you have that connection to the man that put it in. I mean, just how huge has that blue turf been to Boise State's success, to their brand, to their on-the-field success? I mean, how monumental has that been to the ascension of this program?
Well, I know that Jeremiah Dickey has called it the most powerful marketing tool in college football. And I might be slightly paraphrasing there, but that's the gist of what he said. And it's definitely true. I mean, you look at a small town up in Idaho, and I love the great state of Idaho, but it's not a thriving East Coast populace by any means. You look at a small town like that and you say, what makes this football program what it is? I mean, Wyoming has a lot of the same characteristics as what Boise State has. North Dakota State, South Dakota State, at least, they have similar characteristics to what Boise State does, in their kind of town and their cultural vibe. So what is it that makes Boise State successful? And I think all of it goes back to that blue turf. I mean, obviously you have to win. You have to bring in the right coaches. You have to have the Dirk Cutters and the Brian Hawkins and the I just messed up his name there, but the Hawkins and the Chris Peterson, Dan Hawkins. Sorry, I was thinking Brian Harsin. Chris Petersons and the Brian Harsons, mixed up my Boise State coaches together. But you have to go out and get the right coaches. But part of what brings in those right players and those right coaches is the Boise State brand. And my uncle has come on the channel in the past and talked about Boise State and the blue turf and how he kind of came around that idea. And I'm not going to regale again with the story of how the blue turf was formed, but one of the things that he did say is that initially when he put the blue turf in at Boise State, it was a secret. He had only a couple people in his athletic department that knew that was coming in. The coaches, the football coaches, didn't even know it was going in until like a week before. And so it was a very, very close kept secret. And when it did get out, people were not a fan. The media hated it. The local media absolutely hated it. The coaches themselves were not fans of the blue turf. The fan base was kind of split 50-50, but overall, I mean, the feelings were not positive. But then the head coaches came to my uncle and they said, we're getting into the rooms of wide receiver, of playmakers that we were never even in that conversation before. We're sitting in the living rooms of these players that they never even heard of us. And now we have this opportunity because of the blue turf. And so it's not all on the blue turf. You have to go out and you have to go win Fiesta Bowls and all that kind of thing. But I think when you talk about a monumental change, of a historic moment in the landscape of college football that changed what Boise State could be, but also what college football could be, with colored turfs popping up all over the place in the Group of Five and FCS ranks as well. I think you have to look at my uncle's idea there in the early 80s to go in and put in the blue turf for Boise State. And so, 38th anniversary. This is a big one. I've got a couple of big anniversaries. Obviously got, it's like wedding anniversary, birth of the first child, then Boise State's turf. Those are the three big ones right there. So, thanks for bringing that up. It's definitely it was a historic moment, and it is great, and I definitely bear pride being able to have no actual control or meaning to that. That's my uncle who did all of that, but just be able to have some of that association and knowing what it did to Boise State is definitely exciting.
It was such a brilliant marketing tool. I mean, it really does. It brings fans of the blue to Idaho. The fans that come, they're not always Boise State fans. Some of them are not even college football fans. They just want to see that blue turf in Idaho. And it's reached so every corner of this country. I can't tell you how many times in recruiting I've talked to a recruit and asked, have you been a fan of Boise State? And they're like, no, but I played on the blue turf in the NCAA video game, and I love them because of that. It was such a brilliant marketing tool. It was part of what made Boise State what it is today. In my opinion, as much as those Fiesta Bowl wins, that blue turf is part of what makes Boise State as strong, the brand that it is today, and it makes it recognizable. And that's huge. I mean, eyeballs are money, and that's just huge. Well, I got you here. One more thing. We were talking about Boise State's competition for the CFP spot. I didn't mention UNLV. UNLV very much is in contention for that spot. And right now, late in the third quarter, they're only trailing Kansas by 17-16. So that's a heck of a game. I mean, UNLV's already got a win over Houston this year. If they can beat Kansas and then somehow win that Mountain West title, they're right there in line for that fifth spot. So UNLV giving Kansas all it can handle.
Well, I'm going to wrap up here so that you can go and the rest of our viewers can go and watch that fantastic game. Thanks so much, everybody, for being all the way along. I do have a couple more comments here to throw out. Obviously, would be very remiss if I did not throw out this one. This is my wife, Anne-Marie Bleymaier, saying happy to be a proud Liberty Flame fan with you at Bronco Bleymaier. Love you, babe. So thanks so much for watching, everybody. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie, for watching as well. And for everybody that's been all the way through, we've got Oregon State fans saying that we did a great job. So that must be true. We must have done a great performance here. But again, thanks so much, everybody, for sticking all the way through to the end. This was a first time ever doing this, first time live. Most of the time I have the safety net of the recorded studio. And so I can get in there and make myself look really good on the back end, or, at least passable on the back end, but no safety net here today. And it was fun. It was fun walking the tightrope up here with you, Ron. Thanks everybody for contributing, for bringing all of your comments, a lot of loyal listeners that have been there all along from the very beginning with us today. So thanks so much, everybody, for sticking through all the way to the end and watching this through. I hope that we get a couple of repeat watchers as well on the recorded side once this drops. Thanks, Ron, obviously, for coming on and doing this. Great thoughts, as always, and that's great to be able to continue to have you on. Make sure you go check out the work that Ron is doing over at Hero Sports. It's really, really great stuff. So thanks again so much for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching all the way to the end. And for the first time live with you, Bronco Nation, I have the honor of being able, that's right, Big Bill L, to be able to say, Go Big Blue!